My daughter called me a burden. Those 5 words changed everything between us. Words she didn't know I heard while I sat in my study with the door cracked open. "Dad's becoming a financial burden," she told her husband. "This house is worth $675,000 in today's market. We could sell it, put him in assisted living, and finally take that European vacation. 47 years I'd spent building that house. Every nail, every board, every memory with my late wife Margaret was in those walls. The home where I'd raised Rebecca from infancy, paid off the mortgage 15 years ago, and recently spent $42,000 of my retirement savings on renovations because Rebecca had insisted it would increase the property value. I didn't slam the door open, didn't scream a rage. Instead, I quietly closed my book, my hands steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. Then I opened my laptop and typed "How to sell your house privately" into Google. By the time Rebecca knocked on my study door 30 minutes later, asking if I wanted coffee, I already had 4 real estate agents' contact information saved and a lawyer's number written down. "Dad, everything okay?" she asked, noticing my expression. "Absolutely," I replied, smiling as I accepted the coffee. Just thinking about the future, she had no idea what kind of future I was planning. The kind that would teach her exactly what happens when you mistake a lifetime of generosity for weakness. My name is Howard Mitchell, 72 years old, retired building contractor, and this is how I turned my daughter's betrayal into the most expensive lesson she'd ever receive. 3 days later, when Rebecca and her husband Steve left for their weekend trip to visit friends, I made my first call. The buyer would call it a cash offer. My daughter would call it consequences. Let me back up and explain how we got here. My wife Margaret passed away 4 years ago after 43 years of marriage. Pancreatic cancer. 6 months from diagnosis to funeral. Rebecca had suggested I sell the house then, claiming it was too much for one person. But Margaret and I had built this place together in 1975, adding rooms as our family grew, updating it through the decades. This wasn't just a house. It was our legacy. Instead of selling, I stayed and adjusted to life alone. I took up woodworking in the garage, joined a weekly poker game at the community center, maintained the garden Margaret had loved. I was doing fine on my own. My pension from the contractors' union was $3,170 monthly, plus Social Security and the modest investments Margaret and I had built over the years. Not wealthy by any means, but comfortable, secure. Things changed 8 months ago when Rebecca, now 45, announced that she and Steve were having temporary financial difficulties. Steve's investment firm had downsized, cutting his salary by 40%. Their mortgage on their own $890,000 home was underwater. Could they move in with me just until things stabilized? Of course, I said yes. My daughter needed help, and my 4-bedroom house had plenty of space since Margaret passed. Besides, the company would be nice. Or so I thought. The first warning sign came 3 weeks after they moved in. Rebecca suggested we update the kitchen. "Dad, these cabinets are from the 90s, she said over breakfast. "If we modernize, it could add $30,000 to the home's value." "The kitchen works fine for me," I replied, but Rebecca persisted. "Think of it as an investment. Steve and I found this great contractor who can do it for $35,000. I hesitated. That was a significant chunk of my savings, but Rebecca had always had good financial sense. She managed corporate accounts for a consulting firm, and the idea of increasing the home's value seemed prudent. "I suppose that makes sense," I finally agreed. The renovation expanded beyond the kitchen. New floors throughout the first level, updated bathroom fixtures, fresh paint inside and out. By the time it was finished 2 months later, I'd spent $42,000 from my retirement fund. The house looked beautiful, but something felt off about the whole situation. Rebecca and Steve began having friends over, not to socialize with me, but to show off the renovations. I'd overhear comments like, "This place has so much potential and the location alone makes it worth a fortune." Each time, Rebecca would glance my way with an expression I couldn't quite read. The second warning sign appeared when my property tax bill arrived in the mail. Typically, I'd handle all my own finances. I might be in my 70s, but my mind is sharp as ever. But that day, Rebecca intercepted the envelope. "I'll take care of this, Dad," she said, slipping it into her purse before I could object. "Steve and I are organizing all the household expenses now. I've managed my own bills for 50 years, I pointed out. Rebecca patted my hand condescendingly. "And you've done a great job. But let us help now. You should be enjoying retirement, not worrying about paperwork." That evening, I checked my bank account online. There'd been 3 withdrawals I didn't recognize in the past month. $470 to a furniture store, $850 labeled travel deposit, and $390 to a high-end restaurant. When I mentioned these to Rebecca the next morning, she looked surprised, then quickly composed herself. "Oh, those were household expenses," she explained vaguely. "The furniture was for the guest room. The restaurant was when we had your doctor over for dinner, remember? And the travel deposit is for a family vacation we're planning for your birthday. I didn't recall having my doctor over for dinner, and my birthday was 7 months away. But I let it slide, not wanting to create tension. Instead, I began checking my accounts more regularly and keeping detailed notes of every transaction. By month 6 of their stay, the dynamic in the house had shifted dramatically. Steve worked from home 3 days a week, occupying my study from morning until evening. Rebecca suggested I keep the television volume lower so as not to disturb his calls. My poker nights were met with sighs about how they'd have to adjust the security system when I came home late. "Maybe it's time to consider limiting your driving to daytime only." "Dad," Rebecca suggested after I returned from poker at 9:30 p.m. one night. "My driving is fine," I replied firmly. "Dr. Peterson just renewed my license last month." Rebecca exchanged glances with Steve. "We've noticed you seem a little less sharp behind the wheel. It's normal at your age?" "My age." That phrase became increasingly common in their vocabulary. "At your age, Dad, many people downsize. At your age, it's important to have proper care nearby. At your age, managing a house this size becomes a burden." The word burden appeared with increasing frequency. I was becoming a burden. The house was a burden. My routines were burdensome to their schedules. What they didn't know, what they never bothered to ask, was that before retiring, I'd managed construction projects worth millions of dollars. I'd coordinated teams of dozens of workers, juggled complex building regulations, and maintained intricate financial records for my business. I'd built this house with my own hands and maintained it meticulously for nearly 5 decades. There was nothing about property management or finance that I didn't understand. And then came that Tuesday afternoon, the day everything changed. I was in my study, which I was now allowed to use when Steve wasn't working, reading a history book when I heard Rebecca and Steve talking in the kitchen. They didn't realize the vent system in this house carried sound between rooms, something I knew because I'd installed it myself in 1983. "We need to talk about Dad," Rebecca said, her voice low but perfectly audible through the vent. "What about him?" Steve asked. "He's becoming a financial burden. His pension barely covers the property taxes and utilities on this place." That wasn't true. "My pension covered the expenses with over $2,000 to spare each month. I thought he had savings," Steve said. "He did, but the renovations took a big chunk." "And have you seen his medical bills lately?" "His insurance doesn't cover everything." Another lie. My supplemental Medicare policy covered what traditional Medicare didn't. My out-of-pocket expenses rarely exceeded $200 monthly. "So what are you suggesting?" Steve sounded interested. "This house is worth $675,000 in today's market. Maybe more with the renovations we've done." The "we" struck me like a slap. They hadn't contributed a penny to those renovations. We could sell it, put him in assisted living, and finally take that European vacation we've been talking about. Plus have enough for a down payment on a new place for ourselves once the market improves. My heart pounded in my chest, but I kept listening. "Would he agree to that?" Steve asked. Rebecca's laugh held no warmth. "He doesn't need to. I've been talking with an elder law attorney. Dad's getting more confused lately. You've noticed it too, right? How he sometimes forgets conversations we've had." I hadn't forgotten any conversations. I'd simply stopped engaging in many of them because of their condescending tone. With a doctor's evaluation, we could petition for guardianship. For his own protection, of course. Then we can make the decision about the house ourselves. That seems extreme. Steve sounded hesitant. Your dad seems pretty with it most of the time. That's why I've been documenting his episodes. The time he left the stove on, his confusion about the bank withdrawals, his unsafe driving. The attorney says we need a pattern of concerning behavior. I had never left the stove on. The bank withdrawals were their unauthorized expenses. My driving was impeccable. Once we have guardianship, we can make financial decisions on his behalf, including selling this place. How long would that take? Steve's hesitation was evaporating. A few months, maybe less, if Dr. Matthews agrees to help with the competency evaluation. I've already been laying the groundwork with him at Dad's last few appointments. Dr. Matthews, the new physician, Rebecca had insisted I switch to when my doctor of 20 years retired. The same Dr. Matthews who had suggested cognitive testing that I didn't need during my last visit, and assisted living. Those places are expensive, not the basic ones. His pension would cover a decent shared room facility, and we'd have the house proceeds for ourselves. Think about it, at least $600,000 after we pay off the assisted living entrance fee. That's our financial problems solved, and then some. I sat frozen in my chair, the history book forgotten in my lap. My own daughter was plotting to have me declared incompetent, institutionalized, and robbed of my home, all so she could solve her financial problems. When should we start this process? Steve asked, fully on board now. I've already started. I have another appointment with the attorney next week. If all goes well, we could have everything wrapped up by spring. 3 months, Max, 3 months. They were giving me 3 months before they planned to strip me of my autonomy and steal my home. What if he fights it? Steve asked. Rebecca's voice was cold. He won't. By the time he realizes what's happening, it'll be too late. The attorney says these cases almost always favor the children, especially when there's evidence of cognitive decline. And I've been building that evidence for months. That's when I knew what I had to do, not confront them. That would only put them on guard and potentially accelerate their plans. No, I needed to move carefully, deliberately, and with the same methodical attention to detail that had made me a successful contractor for 4 decades. I quietly closed my book, my hands steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. Then I opened my laptop and typed "How to Sell Your House Privately" into Google. By the time Rebecca knocked on my study door 30 minutes later, asking if I wanted coffee, I already had 4 real estate agents' contact information saved and a lawyer's number written down. "Dad, everything okay?" she asked, noticing my expression. "Absolutely," I replied, smiling as I accepted the coffee. Just thinking about the future indeed, one very different from what Rebecca and Steve were planning. My plan began with information gathering. The next morning, I drove to my bank while Rebecca and Steve were at work. I spoke with Margaret Reynolds, the branch manager who had known me for 30 years. "Howard, what can I do for you today?" she asked warmly. "I need to review all activity on my accounts for the past 6 months," I explained. "And I may need to make some changes to my account structure." An hour later, I had printouts confirming what I suspected. Beyond the withdrawals I'd already noticed, there were dozens of smaller transactions at restaurants, clothing stores, and online retailers that I'd never authorized. In total, Rebecca and Steve had siphoned nearly $7,400 from my accounts. "I'd like to open a new account," I told Margaret, "and transfer the majority of my funds there. Is there a problem with your current account?" "Let's just say I'm concerned about unauthorized access." Margaret's expression shifted to concern. "Howard, is someone taking advantage of you financially?" "For now, yes, but not for much longer." By noon, I had a new account with updated security protocols. I transferred all but $5,000 from my original account, leaving just enough to avoid raising Rebecca's suspicions immediately. Next, I called Gerald Hoffman, an attorney who had handled some contracts for my construction business before I retired. "Howard Mitchell. It's been, 5 years?" Gerald's voice boomed through the phone. At least that, I agreed. Gerald, I need some legal counsel. It's a sensitive matter involving potential elder abuse and real estate. We arranged to meet that afternoon. In his office, I laid out everything. The renovations, the intercepted bills, the unauthorized withdrawals, and most importantly, the conversation I'd overheard. Gerald's expression grew increasingly grave. What they're planning is highly illegal, Howard. Financial exploitation of an elder is a criminal offense. We could go to the authorities right now. I shook my head. Not yet. I have a different approach in mind. What are you thinking? I want to sell the house before they can take control. But I want to do it without them knowing. Gerald leaned back in his chair, considering. Possible, but tricky. You'd need to list and show the property while they're not there. Find a buyer willing to close quickly and have somewhere else to go before they realize what's happening. Can it be done legally? Absolutely. The house is solely in your name. You have every right to sell it without their input or approval. He paused. But Howard, where would you go? I smiled. I've been thinking about that retirement community on Lakeside Drive, the one Margaret and I used to talk about for some day. Willow Creek? That's a nice place, but their waiting list is usually a year long. Let's find out if money can change that timeline. By the end of our meeting, Gerald had outlined the legal strategy and put me in touch with Catherine Liu, a real estate agent who specialized in quick private sales. She's discreet and effective, Gerald assured me. If anyone can sell your house without your daughter knowing, it's Catherine. Catherine agreed to meet me at a coffee shop the following morning. A sharp woman in her 50s, she quickly grasped the situation. To be clear, she said, taking notes, you want to list and sell the property within 3 months, without your daughter who lives in the house knowing? Exactly. We'll need to be creative with showings. Is there a regular time when the house is empty? I nodded. Rebecca and Steve go to a gym class every Saturday morning from 9 to 11. They also have dinner with friends most Friday evenings. Perfect. We'll schedule showings during those windows. Catherine tapped her pen thoughtfully. Given the renovations and the current market in your neighborhood, I think we should list at $725,000. Rebecca thought it was worth $675,000. I noted. Catherine shook her head. Your daughter was undervaluing it. The location alone commands a premium, and those renovations you described would definitely boost the price. I wouldn't be surprised if we get offers above asking. The possibility that Rebecca wasn't just planning to steal my home, but also undervalue it, added another layer of betrayal. But I pushed that thought aside and focused on the plan. How quickly can we list? I can have a photographer out during one of those Saturday windows. We'll list the following Monday, exclusive to my contacts first. With the right marketing and your price point, we could have offers within 2 weeks. Everything was moving faster than I'd anticipated. Within 2 days, I had begun the application process for Willow Creek Senior Living, opened a new bank account, consulted with an attorney, and engaged a real estate agent. But there was one more crucial element I needed to address: documentation of Rebecca's plan. Gerald had advised me to gather evidence of Rebecca's intentions. If she challenges the sale later or attempts to pursue guardianship, we'll need proof of her motives, he'd explained. That evening, I purchased a small digital recorder from an electronics store. The next day, when Rebecca and Steve were both at work, I placed it carefully under the kitchen table, where they typically had their private conversations. 3 days passed before the recorder captured anything significant. I retrieved it during their Saturday gym session and listened in my car parked 2 blocks away. I spoke with the attorney again. Rebecca's voice came through clearly. He says the guardianship process could be streamlined if we have Dr. Matthews document cognitive concerns at Dad's next appointment. Is Matthews on board with this? Steve asked. He understands the situation. I told him Dad's been making concerning financial decisions and forgetting important conversations. He agreed to include that in his assessment. And once we have guardianship, we move him to Sunny Pines. I toured it yesterday. It's basic but clean. His room would be small but sufficient. My blood ran cold. Sunny Pines was the most depressing assisted living facility in the county. It had been in the news last year for neglect violations. How long before we can list the house? The attorney says we could move forward immediately once guardianship is established. We could list by June, close by July, and be in our new place by August. Perfect timing for that European vacation, Steve laughed. I stopped the recording, my hands shaking with anger now. Not only were they planning to declare me incompetent and sell my home, but they intended to place me in a substandard facility with a history of neglect, all while they vacationed in Europe with my money. That settled it. I called Catherine Liu immediately. I want to accelerate the timeline, I told her. How soon can we get the house on the market? The photographer can come tomorrow during your Saturday window. We could list by Monday? Do it. Next, I called Willow Creek Senior Living and asked to speak with the admissions director. Mr. Mitchell, I've reviewed your application, said Diane Forster. Your financial qualifications are excellent, but as I mentioned, our waiting list for a one-bedroom apartment is approximately 10-12 months. Miss Forster, I understand the policy, but I'm in an unusual situation. I explained the circumstances briefly, emphasizing the need for immediate housing. There was a pause before she responded. Actually, we did have a cancellation yesterday. A one-bedroom on the 3rd floor with a lake view just became available. The entrance fee is $175,000, with monthly fees of $2,850. It's one of our premium units. That sounds perfect. How soon could I move in? The unit will be ready in 3 weeks. But Mr. Mitchell, the entrance fee would need to be paid in full to secure it. I understand. I'll have my attorney contact you this afternoon to arrange payment from my home sale proceeds. We can set up an escrow arrangement. By the end of the day, I had set everything in motion. The house would be listed Monday. The Willow Creek apartment would be mine in 3 weeks. Gerald was preparing the necessary paperwork to protect my assets and document Rebecca's plans. Now came the hardest part, maintaining normalcy while everything unfolded. The photographer came during Saturday's gym session as planned. Catherine worked efficiently, listing the property Monday as a private exclusive to her network of qualified buyers. By Wednesday, she had scheduled 4 showings for Friday evening when Rebecca and Steve would be at their regular dinner with friends. Dad, we're heading out to meet the Johnsons, Rebecca called that Friday. There's lasagna in the fridge if you get hungry. Have fun, I replied casually from my armchair, appearing engrossed in a television program. Don't worry about me. The moment their car pulled out of the driveway, I sprang into action, turning on all the lights, adjusting the thermostat, and making sure everything was perfect for the showings. Catherine arrived 10 minutes later with the first prospective buyers. By the end of the evening, all 4 groups had toured the house. I sat in my car around the corner during each showing, heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and exhilaration. This was my home of nearly 5 decades, filled with memories of Margaret and our life together. Selling it felt like another loss, but the alternative, having it taken from me against my will, would be far worse, Catherine called as I drove back to the house after the last showing. Howard, we have tremendous interest. I expect we'll have multiple offers by Monday. That's wonderful news, I said, emotion catching in my throat. Are you okay with this? It's not too late to reconsider. I thought about Rebecca's cold voice planning my institutionalization, about Steve calculating how my life savings would fund their European vacation. I'm more than okay with it. I'm taking back control. The following Monday, Catherine called again. Howard, we have 3 offers. The highest is $742,000, all cash, with a 30-day close and no contingencies. All cash? I echoed. That was even better than I'd hoped. Yes, from a couple downsizing from a larger property. They can close as quickly as 3 weeks if necessary. Let's accept it. And Catherine, I'd like to close in exactly 3 weeks. That would align perfectly with my Willow Creek move-in date. I'll make it happen, she promised. The next 3 weeks were a careful balancing act. I began subtly packing personal items when Rebecca and Steve were out, focusing on irreplaceable mementos and photographs. I told Rebecca I was organizing when she questioned boxes in my closet. I had my mail forwarded to Gerald's office to prevent Rebecca from intercepting any paperwork related to the sale or Willow Creek. Meanwhile, the sale progressed smoothly. The inspection was completed during another gym session. The appraisal came in at $745,000, validating Catherine's pricing strategy. The buyers remained enthusiastic, even agreeing to my request for a 3-day rent-back after closing to organize my move. Those 3 days would be crucial for the final phase of my plan. 2 days before closing, Rebecca mentioned my upcoming doctor's appointment. "Dad, don't forget you're seeing Dr. Matthews on Thursday. I've taken the afternoon off to drive you," the appointment she'd arranged to document my supposed cognitive decline. I nodded agreeably. "That's thoughtful of you, Rebecca." That evening, I called Dr. Matthews' office and cancelled the appointment, then contacted my former physician, Dr. Klein, who had recently returned from retirement to work part-time. "Howard, good to hear from you," Dr. Klein greeted me. "What can I do for you?" I explained the situation briefly, including Rebecca's attempt to use medical documentation against me. "That's unconscionable," Dr. Klein said firmly. "I'd be happy to perform a cognitive assessment and document your current status. How's tomorrow morning?" The next day, while Rebecca was at work, I visited Dr. Klein and underwent a complete cognitive evaluation. The results, as I expected, showed no impairment whatsoever. In fact, Dr. Klein noted that my cognitive function was exceptional for any age. "I'm documenting this thoroughly," he assured me, "with copies for both you and your attorney. With this final piece of protection in place, everything was set." The closing was scheduled for Tuesday, March 15th. My move-in date at Willow Creek was Friday, March 18th. I would have 3 days to complete my plan and reveal everything to Rebecca and Steve. Closing day arrived. I told Rebecca I was going to my weekly poker game, then met Catherine and Gerald at the title company office. Signing the papers took less than an hour. By noon, I was officially no longer the owner of 1487 Oakwood Drive. The proceeds, $742,000 minus the outstanding expenses, were wired directly to an escrow account, controlled by Gerald's firm. From there, $175,000 would go to Willow Creek for my entrance fee, and the balance would be transferred to my new, secure account. I returned home that afternoon to find Rebecca in the kitchen preparing dinner. "How was poker, Dad?" she asked casually. "Very productive," I replied truthfully. "I think I came out ahead." "That's nice," she said absently, not really listening. "By the way, what happened with your appointment today?" "Dr. Matthews' office said you cancelled." I feigned confusion. "Did I? I could have sworn it was next week." Rebecca sighed dramatically. "This is exactly what I've been worried about, Dad. These memory lapses are becoming more frequent." "You're probably right," I agreed mildly. "Memory isn't what it used to be." She seemed pleased by my acquiescence, undoubtedly seeing it as more evidence for her guardianship case. "I've rescheduled for next Monday," she informed me. "I'll make sure you don't forget." "That's very thoughtful." The next 2 days passed uneventfully. I continued my subtle packing while maintaining the appearance of normal routines. Rebecca and Steve seemed increasingly confident in their plan, occasionally exchanging meaningful glances when I would deliberately misplace something or ask a repeat question. Finally, Friday arrived, my move-in day at Willow Creek. That morning, after Rebecca and Steve left for work, a moving crew arrived to transport the furniture I'd selected to keep. Margaret's favorite reading chair, a bed, several family heirlooms, and boxes of personal belongings I'd gradually packed. Everything was headed to my new apartment at Willow Creek. By late afternoon, the movers had finished. The house looked largely the same. I deliberately left most of the furniture to maintain appearances for one final evening. I had arranged for a car service to take me to Willow Creek after implementing the final phase of my plan. But first, I had one last task. I called Rebecca at work. "Dad, is everything okay?" She sounded concerned by my unexpected call. "Everything's fine. I was thinking we should have a special family dinner tonight." Just the three of us. Oh, she sounded surprised. Sure, I guess. Any particular reason? I've been reflecting on the future, I said, choosing my words carefully. I think it's time we discuss some changes. Rebecca's voice became eager. That's a great idea, Dad. We've been wanting to talk about the future, too. I'll bet you have, I thought. I'll pick up steaks on my way home, she continued. Around 6? Perfect. At precisely 6:15 that evening, Rebecca and Steve arrived home with grocery bags containing steaks, wine, and side dishes. I was sitting in the living room dressed in my best sweater and slacks. You look nice, Dad, Rebecca commented as she unloaded the groceries. Special occasion? In a way, I replied. I wanted to look presentable for our discussion tonight. Steve opened a bottle of wine and poured 3 glasses. Here's to family discussions, he said, handing me one. I accepted it with a smile. Indeed, during dinner, conversation remained superficial. Work updates, neighborhood news, nothing of substance. I could sense Rebecca and Steve restraining themselves, likely planning to introduce the topic of my future over dessert, sure enough. As Rebecca served apple pie, Margaret's recipe. Though not nearly as good, she cleared her throat. Dad, Steve and I have been talking. We're concerned about how much work this house is for you. I nodded encouragingly. It is a large property for one person. She exchanged a quick glance with Steve, clearly pleased by my receptiveness. Exactly, she continued. And with the stairs, the maintenance, it's a lot for someone your age. Plus the expenses, Steve added. Property taxes in this neighborhood are brutal. I took a bite of pie, chewing thoughtfully. You both make excellent points. I've been thinking along similar lines myself. Rebecca leaned forward eagerly. You have? Absolutely. In fact, that's why I wanted to have this dinner. I've made some decisions about my future. That's wonderful, Dad, Rebecca said, poorly concealing her excitement. We fully support you thinking about alternatives. In fact, we've done some research on communities that might be perfect for your needs. How thoughtful, I said, taking another bite of pie. But that won't be necessary. Rebecca's smile faltered slightly. What do you mean? I've already found a place. Willow Creek Senior Living on Lakeside Drive. I move in today, actually. The silence that followed was deafening. Rebecca's fork clattered against her plate. You, what? She finally managed. I've purchased a 1-bedroom apartment at Willow Creek, Lakeview, 3rd floor. It's quite lovely. Steve found his voice first. But those places are expensive. The entrance fees alone, $175,000, I supplied. Plus $2,350 monthly. Well within my budget now. How could you possibly afford that? Rebecca demanded, her composure cracking. I smiled, the moment I'd been anticipating for weeks finally at hand. That's the other piece of news I wanted to share. I sold the house. Rebecca's face drained of color. You what? Sold it? $742,000, all cash offer. We closed on Tuesday. That's impossible, Steve sputtered. We've been here the whole time. There was no for sale sign, no showings. The showings happened during your Friday dinners out and Saturday gym sessions, I explained calmly. Catherine Liu handled everything beautifully. Very discreet. Rebecca's shock was transforming into anger. You had no right to do that without discussing it with us. I set down my fork and looked my daughter directly in the eyes. Actually, I had every right. The house was solely in my name, and discussing it with you would have been counterproductive given your plans. What plans? Her voice rose an octave. Your plans to have me declared incompetent, obtain guardianship, place me in Sunny Pines, and sell my house to fund your European vacation and new home purchase? I recited the details with clinical precision. Their expressions would have been comical under different circumstances, pure shock giving way to horror as they realized I knew everything. I don't know what you're talking about. Rebecca attempted weakly. I reached into my pocket and placed the digital recorder on the table. I think you do. With a press of a button, Rebecca's voice filled the dining room. We could sell it, put him in assisted living, and finally take that European vacation we've been talking about. Plus have enough for a down payment on a new place for ourselves once the market improves. I pressed stop. There's more if you'd like to hear it. About 45 minutes in total, including your discussions about Dr. Matthews documenting cognitive decline that doesn't exist, your tour of Sunny Pines, and your timeline for listing the house by June. Steve's face had gone ashen. Rebecca's hands trembled as she reached for her wineglass. "Dad, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted, my voice still calm, but now allowing some of my hurt and anger to surface. "I understand that my daughter, who I raised alone after her mother died, who I put through college without her taking a dime in student loans, who I welcomed into my home when she needed help, this daughter called me a burden and plotted to rob me of my autonomy and property." Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes, whether from genuine remorse or the realization that her plan had spectacularly backfired. I couldn't tell. "Where are we supposed to go?" Steve asked, his voice hollow. "That's not my concern," I replied. "But you have 3 days. The new owners take possession on Monday. 3 days." Rebecca gasped. "That's impossible. We can't find a place in 3 days." "Perhaps you should have thought of that before planning to ship me off to Sunny Pines without my consent." I stood up from the table. "Now, if you'll excuse me, my car service will be arriving shortly to take me to Willow Creek. I've already moved my essential belongings. You can't just leave us homeless," Rebecca cried. "I'm not." "You have resources, Rebecca. You have your jobs, your savings. What's left of them after reimbursing the $7,400 you took from my accounts without permission." I placed a detailed accounting statement on the table. "Gerald will be expecting that payment by the end of next week, by the way. Your attorney knows about this?" Steve asked weakly. "Gerald knows everything, including documentation from Dr. Klein confirming my perfect cognitive health." I buttoned my cardigan calmly. "He also has copies of the recordings and bank records showing your unauthorized withdrawals. Insurance, as it were, against any future attempts to challenge my competence." The doorbell rang, my car service arriving right on schedule. "I'll leave you to process this information," I said, picking up my overnight bag from beside the door. "The new owners are a lovely young couple, by the way. Very excited about the renovations." Rebecca stood, tears streaming down her face now. "Dad, please, we can work this out." I paused at the door, looking at my daughter one last time. The anger I'd felt had largely burned away, leaving only sadness and disappointment in its place. "You called me a burden, Rebecca. You planned to discard me like something broken and useless. There's nothing to work out." "I didn't mean it," she sobbed. "I was stressed about money." "Please don't leave like this." "I'm not leaving as much as moving forward," I replied. "Something you've taught me the importance of doing." With that, I walked out the door to my waiting car, leaving my daughter and her husband standing in the home that was no longer mine or theirs. The drive to Willow Creek took 23 minutes. I watched familiar neighborhoods pass by through the window, feeling a complex mixture of grief, relief, and resolution. Leaving the house where Margaret and I had built our lives wasn't easy. But neither was discovering that my only child viewed me as nothing more than a financial asset to be liquidated. My apartment at Willow Creek exceeded my expectations. Bright and modern, with large windows overlooking the lake, it was a perfect size for one person. The building had a library, game room, restaurant-quality dining facilities, and gardens for walking. Most importantly, it had respect. Something my own home had increasingly lacked. The staff welcomed me warmly, helping me settle in that evening. I slept peacefully for the first time in months, free from the weight of secrets and schemes happening under my own roof. Saturday morning, my phone began ringing at 7:45 a.m. Rebecca calling repeatedly. I declined each call. By noon, there were 17 missed calls and 12 text messages ranging from apologetic, "Please, Dad, we need to talk," to desperate, "We have nowhere to go," to angry, "You can't do this to your own daughter." I finally responded with a single text. "I suggest you focus your energy on finding a new place to live rather than trying to change what can't be changed." By Sunday, the calls had stopped. Gerald informed me that Rebecca and Steve had contacted a lawyer. who quickly advised them they had no case after reviewing the documentation Gerald provided. "Your daughter claimed you weren't of sound mind when you sold the house," Gerald told me over lunch in the Willow Creek dining room. Her attorney changed his tune when I shared Dr. Klein's evaluation and played a few choice recordings. "And the money they took from my accounts? They've agreed to repay it in full by the end of the month." Monday came, and the new owners took possession of 1487 Oakwood Drive. Catherine Liu called to inform me that Rebecca and Steve had vacated the property Sunday night, leaving it in reasonable condition. "They asked me to give you a message," Catherine said hesitantly. "What is it?" "Rebecca said to tell you they're staying with friends while they figure things out. And she said she's sorry." Sorry. Such a small word for such a profound betrayal. "Thank you for passing that along," I replied non-committally. 6 weeks have passed since that night. I've settled comfortably into life at Willow Creek. I've joined the woodworking club, resumed my weekly poker game with a new group of friends, and even started volunteering at the community library. My apartment is now fully furnished, some pieces from the old house, some new items that reflect this next chapter of life. Rebecca has called several times. I answered once, about 2 weeks ago. The conversation was brief and tense. They've rented an apartment across town, she told me, much smaller than they'd hoped. The European vacation has been postponed indefinitely. She asked if she could visit. "Not yet," I told her. "Maybe someday, but not yet." "I really am sorry, Dad," she said before hanging up. "I don't expect you to believe me, but I am. Perhaps one day I will believe her. Perhaps one day we'll rebuild some version of a relationship. But trust, once broken so completely, cannot be easily repaired. And some words, once spoken, cannot be unheard. My daughter called me a burden. The buyer called it a cash offer. Both statements changed my life, but only one was on my terms. And at 72, I've learned that living on your own terms is not a burden. It's the only way to live at all. Last week, I received a letter from Rebecca. Inside was a check for $7,400, repayment of what she'd taken from my accounts, along with a handwritten note. "Dad, I know money can't fix what I broke. I'm seeking therapy to understand why I was willing to hurt the person who has always been there for me. I hope someday you can forgive me, but I understand if you can't. All I ask is that you're happy in your new home. You deserve that and so much more." With love and deepest regret, Rebecca, I deposited the check. The note I placed in my desk drawer, neither discarding it nor responding to it. Some wounds need time before you know if they can heal. Yesterday, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset over the lake. A neighbor from down the hall joined me, a widow named Claire, who's lived at Willow Creek for 3 years. We talked about our children. Her son lives in Seattle and visits twice a year, and about the challenges of aging in a society that often views the elderly as burdens rather than repositories of wisdom and experience. "My late husband used to say that getting older is a privilege denied to many," Claire remarked as the sky turned crimson and gold. "I try to remember that on difficult days. Your husband sounds like a wise man," I replied. He was. "What about your wife? Rebecca, wasn't it?" "Margaret," I corrected gently. "And yes, she was the wisest person I've ever known. She would have handled this situation with Rebecca better than I did." Claire considered this. "Would she? Or would she have done exactly what you did? Protected herself from someone who'd proven they couldn't be trusted?" I hadn't thought of it that way. Had I truly handled things poorly? Or had I simply refused to be victimized by my own child? "Margaret always said that love doesn't mean being a doormat," I recalled aloud. She believed in second chances, but not at the expense of self-respect. "Smart woman," Claire nodded approvingly. "And she raised a smart man." As darkness settled over the lake, I reflected on the journey of the past 3 months. The pain of betrayal still lingered, but it was increasingly overshadowed by a sense of pride in having taken control of my future. The house was gone, but the memories remained. My relationship with Rebecca was damaged, perhaps irreparably. But I was not the burden she had labeled me. I was Howard Mitchell, 72 years old, retired building contractor, new resident of Willow Creek Senior Living and master of my own destiny. My daughter had underestimated me, mistaking kindness for weakness and generosity for obligation. Her mistake had cost her a home, an inheritance, and a father's trust. My discovery had cost me a house full of memories, but gained me something more valuable: the assurance that no one would ever again decide my worth or my future without my consent. The buyer had indeed called it a cash offer, $742,000 for a house, but the lesson it taught my daughter was priceless.